Welcome to Zooming In. I'm Andy Craig. Over the past week or so, there's been a lot of chatter about removing our floridly insane president from office between the Iran war and his threats and his ever crazier rants. It's getting more discussion than it has at any point so far in the second term. And so to discuss that, we're joined by a man who needs no introduction, best known, no doubt, as the former chief of staff to Vice President Dan Quayle. But these days, he's the editor at large at The Bulwark, Bill Kristol. Well, thanks for joining us. So it's been a bit of a wild week, even by Donald Trump standards. One thing I wanted to talk with you about, you wrote about on Monday, and a lot of us have been talking about more this past week. How are we going to get this guy out of office? Because we cannot realistically stand to wait and just ignore that question until January 2029. He's kind of just, aside from all the crimes and bad things he's doing, he's kind of manifestly insane. So what are your thoughts on broaching that conversation and really putting it front and center going forward?
Yeah, well, good to be with you, Andy, and good to be with the Unpopulist team. I guess since the beginning of the second term, I thought people have underestimated how dangerous Trump would be with 4 years in office. Obviously the public in general probably has, but including a lot of our friends and allies, it's sort of assumed things, well, the worst is the early part. He's going to start with a bang, Doge, mass deportation, but he'll retreat from a lot of this and we'll sort of get back to something vaguely resembling normalcy. I think a lot of people have had that implicit assumption, even if they wouldn't quite put it that way, or maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, not quite normalcy, but a manageable situation, especially if Democrats win the House or obviously both houses of Congress. They can check him some. And I just have thought that 4 years of this is terrifying and genuinely dangerous. And but then I waited to see, as we all did. And I think 15 months in, we can say that while he adjusts a little bit to political and economic reality on tariffs or to some degree on mass deportation, he's also gotten more unhinged, certainly in foreign policy, certainly in his willingness to take risks and be reckless there, certainly in his rhetoric about sort of genocide of an entire civilization, and in his actual policies as well. I just think, and so he at least will probably stay at the current level of recklessness, but generally authoritarian movements get more radicalized, not less, as they move forward. And generally someone like Trump gets more unhinged, not less, as it all goes to his head, as either he feels success and the rush of excitement that comes from that, conquest, Venezuela, blowing up fishing boats, etc., or as he feels cornered, feels that he's not succeeding and that he has to be more sort of desperate in what he does. But either way, I think there's a reasonably good chance things get worse, not better. And it's foolish to sit around wait. And they're bad enough, as you sort of suggested in your question anyway. The status quo is not good either. So accepting the notion that we're stuck with them for 4 years, that's the American system. That's the downside of not having a parliamentary system. And we just have to manage around that. We may end up having to do that, obviously. And it's worth devoting a lot of thought, as you have, to what Congress can do, what others in the executive branch can quietly do to slow things down, what the courts can do. And so what we can do as sort of citizens can do, all that's very important. But I think it really, for me, it was the genocidal comments on the Iranian civilization and the general conduct of the war that really made me think we should really have open up. I should do my little bit to try to help open up a conversation, which you've actually, I think we're opening up a little bit before me about, what about, it's sort of silly. We're all looking at these workarounds because we were told, not unreasonably, that another impeachment would be impossible in the current situation with Republicans controlling Congress, unwise to talk about because the first two, I guess, didn't work out so well, and Democrats want to run on other issues, and et cetera, et cetera. No one wants to just put Democrats in power so they can start impeaching again, allegedly. And so people have been sort of shying away from talking about it, but it's kind of crazy not to put it front and center and to say we're not fated to this. We do have a whole provision of the Constitution that's set up for this. Basically, it wouldn't, unfortunately, frankly, put someone we like in office. It'll put J.D. Vance in office, so that you can't say if you're a Republican or even a Trump loyalist, even that it's Trump's pick who will succeed him, right? And Trump's pick who's been loyal to him. It's not as if we're kind of cleverly replacing Trump with an anti-Trump Republican. So it's just to get a guy who's just increasingly unhinged and dangerous out of office. So I think it's very much worth pushing for impeachment.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, I was writing about it earlier last year, and also talked to some members of Congress who were, backbenchers essentially, who wanted to file impeachment resolutions. And so I discussed with them, here's how to draft, here's the procedural rules and everything. But it was very striking. I mean, this was about a year ago now. I mean, it was last spring. Al Green did an attempt. Sri Thanadar did an attempt. There's been a few others who've talked about it here and there. But the House leadership, the Democratic leadership, came down pretty hard against that. There was very much this conventional wisdom that no, we don't want to talk about it for all those reasons you were kind of going through. That this idea that the past two impeachments had backfired in particular, I think is part of it. And there's just not really any good evidence of that. I mean, both times, particularly the second one, but it was true of the first one as well, majorities wanted him convicted. Like, impeaching him was never unpopular. It didn't get to 2/3, obviously, in the Senate. But I don't think there's this idea that there's a lot of voters out there who are parsing their disapproval from Trump, but oh no, impeaching him would be going too far. I think that's a very kind of inside the bubble DC overthinking it thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, and also even if the first one, I don't, there's no evidence. As you say, Trump lost after all the 2020 election after he'd been impeached at the very end of 2019, beginning of 2020. He was set back, I think, by the impeachment. Unfortunately, there was a failure to convict in 2021, but it took him a while to reestablish his control of the party. It's a tragedy, really, for the country that he succeeded in doing so, but it wasn't really the fault of impeaching him, I don't think. So I agree with that. But even if those had backfired, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't prove the next one would. Now, just to be clear, I don't know quite where you are on this. I'm not particularly saying that every Democrat running in 2026 has to spend all his time talking about impeachment. I mean, I don't think, and if some of them are in districts where they think they don't need to focus on that, but just on a more kind of common sense and modest, we're going to check Trump. We're going to stop the mass deportations. We're going to stop the stupid and unauthorized wars. We're going to stop, all kinds of other things. We're not going to confirm, if you're running for the Senate, his judges or some of his cabinet officials, so we don't have the Hegseth, Bondi, Nome type insanity anymore. That's fine. I think we're in the business of the bulwark. You're in the business of the unpopulist, of saying what we think. And, some politicians can't quite say what they fully think, and that's okay with me. Now, we'll have to have real debate in January if Democrats win the House, which I expect they will, about do they move ahead or not. But for now, it's a bit more of a rhetorical thing, I suppose. And therefore, as I say, I'm not insisting that everyone politically emphasize it as much as I would right now. But I think it's important to lay the groundwork for why it really is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I mean, there has been a bit of the dam breaking. I think the Iran genocidal threat was definitely a big part of it. I mean, just last night he was posting a snuff video of that woman getting murdered. His rants every day are unhinged. I mean, there is, to what degree should we think about this as, he's malign. He wants to do bad things. He commits crimes, and that's not entirely new. But he does seem like his mental health, his physical health is in decline in a way that's maybe accelerating, or he's becoming even more kind of just unhinged in a detached from reality sort of way. Is that to some degree maybe an easier case people to make, or is it just true on the merits that he's getting crazier?
I think it's true on the merits. I'm curious about your thoughts of this because you've been laboring in these vineyards maybe a little longer than I have, or more actively on the kind of impeachment side of things. Yeah, I think it's very. I mean, I think if he was maligned but stable, people would say, "Well, People voted for him, and he's doing kind of what he said he would do, and majorities in Congress are going along with it." So you don't like it, but you can't really impeach someone for that. They could say. I mean, I would still maybe argue on that. I would argue on that, and if he were simply wacky and sort of rhetorically crazy, but they weren't really resulting in real policies, one might also say, well, it's unfortunate that we put in office someone who's a little unstable and stuff, but the system is kind of constraining him. But I do think it's the combination that's really, really dangerous, right? The malignity plus the unhinged character of his behavior, not just his personality, not just what he says, but his actual behavior in office. I mean, we're now watching him in real time, becoming obsessed about, kind of both silly things, but also the kind of grandiosity, the megalomania. You see it in this sort of, as I say, silly side of things, I suppose, the Kennedy Center and the, Arc de Triomphe and all that. It's not silly, but not as important, I guess one could say. But not as important as going to war. But I mean, and again, none of this excuses either the Congress for not stopping him from doing certain things, but they didn't, and he's done them, and they should stop him in the future. But they also should remove him from office. I wonder about that. I do think the kind of unhinged character and chaotic character of it might be a little easier to bring home, at least to some people, or at least worth stressing, in addition to the malignity. What do you think?
No, I think that's right. I mean, he's not just bad; he's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those things that's part of the surreal moment of this whole era. I mean, to a degree, people can say, and it's true, oh well, he's always been nuts. But I do think it's undeniable that he has been getting worse in a way that's accelerating. And it's also obvious that they're not being honest about his health. The deal with him disappearing for a few days every month and coming back with his hand bruised. And, he's obviously getting some kind of IV medical treatment. And, we have no idea what that might be. It could be something relatively mundane. But there are, reasonable possibilities. I mean, you've been in the White House before. Usually the president's health is something they're previous president may be accepted, but in general, it's something that there's a lot of transparency about. There's a lot of being at pains to say, oh, the president had his physical and this is what they found and these are what meds he's on and all that kind of thing. And now we're, going a decade now with presidents either in or pushing their 80s. And all of a sudden that kind of information is not out there. I think it does hit in a narrative. It kind of offers a permission structure for people to say, oh, I voted for him 3 times, but now he's, what are you going to do? He's in his 80s and he's got health issues. So we're going to be, maybe that is a bit of a door opening.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, reminding people, this isn't that's something I particularly like to do in a sense, but I don't relish doing it. But it's a true statement that he'll be succeeded by J.D. Vance. I mean, we're not talking about, it's not a coup. We're not keeping a party in, it's not what Trump tried to do, stay in power when the other party had won the presidency. We're not proposing he be replaced by whoever the Democratic nominee might be in 27, 28. We're actually acting against our electoral interests in the sense that probably an incumbent president, J.D. Vance, is a stronger candidate in 28, could well be at least in 2028 than somewhat VP who's been loyal, but also differing a little bit. And that's always just a tough thing to pull off, the kind of succeeding the president. So it's not even in the Democrats' short-term interest, really, to move ahead on, you might say, removing Trump. Let it just get worse and worse under him and let it drag Vance further and further down. But it is really too risky for the country. And I wrote something this morning in the newsletter that maybe was a little bit of wishful thinking, but interpreting Melania's bizarre appearance yesterday as her kind of throwing Trump under the bus. I mean, it's all about how she's not guilty of anything with respect to Epstein. She's being unfairly introduced. She didn't ride on the plane. She didn't know him well at all. She never defends her husband. It's really striking. I mean, she's literally she's speaking in the White House. I've never really seen this before. The first lady speaking in the cross hall of the White House, which is where presidents speak often,
Hmm.
and where they often deliver quite important addresses. Where Trump spoke a week ago, I guess it was, on Iran. She has the seal of the president of the United States up on the, on the podium, on the lectern, and then she, I don't know. I guess they can arrange to have the first lady speak there if they want. Obviously, they can. They did, but pretty striking. She didn't just put out a statement. She didn't give an interview to a friendly reporter in which she reminded everyone that if it's true, that she's never been on Epstein's plane, et cetera, et cetera. She gives this formal statement and goes out of her way to defend herself and never defends Trump. Her husband. She mentions him 2 or 3 times, really in passing, as we went to parties that everyone went to these parties in Palm Beach or whatever, but now, how she met Donald, she says, it wasn't through Epstein, but she never says, and by the way, he's also being slandered here. He's innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. Literally not a word. Really invites people, I think, to think, I don't know, well, I guess she's defending herself. She doesn't feel confident or comfortable defending her husband. Maybe she knows too much to do that.
It was really bizarre. And it could be that she was like trying to get in front of something. I mean, that's the reasonable implication.
Right.
It could also be like these people just do stuff that doesn't make sense all the time.
Fair enough.
So it could have been she just had a bug about, she's sick of people saying this about her. She's threatening lawsuits and that kind of thing. But it was definitely notable that she did that kind of weirdly formal, almost presidential address style thing, and then flat zero defending him directly. One thing that's come up that's been a little bit frustrating the past week is, so there's been a lot of members of Congress calling for removal, but a lot of them are talking about the 25th Amendment, which in a sense, I guess it makes some sense, because if you're going to focus on that, hey, he's crazy angle, then, in theory, that's what the 25th Amendment is for. But it's also a little bit frustrating. And we saw this after January 6th, too, when the House passed a resolution before they moved to impeachment, asking Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. Congress has its own responsibility and its own power with impeachment. And for those who don't, have their pocket constitution memorized, the 25th Amendment is harder. It takes the vice president, a majority of the cabinet, and then 2/3 in both houses to side with the VP in order to keep the president out, as opposed to impeachment is a simple majority in the House and 2/3 in the Senate. Am I being a little bit too pedantic about this? Are they getting at the gist of the right idea? Or is that, it feels like it's a little bit of a dodge, because saying that doesn't put the onus on them to actually do something, to initiate it in the House.
I agree that in that respect, it is a dodge, and that's why they, of course, like to call on other people to do it rather than necessarily stepping up to the plate themselves. Having said that, it's also kind of useful for them to do it in a way, because it does put removal on the table, and it lets us say, well, wait a second, don't you have the constitutional power to do it? This 25th Amendment was really put into the Constitution because of presumably presidential illness or debility, or but he doesn't see it, and he hangs in this. I think, didn't it come after? There were a couple of days Reagan had operations and was sort of out of it for a couple of days supposedly, and there was this awkward and who was Bush in charge exactly? And I think it sort of tried to routinize that, as that's part of the amendment, and then also address the question of what if the president is just not up to it anymore. So the cabinet, the vice president and the cabinet see that much more closely and clearly than members of Congress, right? This, in a way, you could imagine president just Woodrow Wilson situation gets hidden away or something.
Exactly, yeah.
So, I'm not against the 25th Amendment, but yeah, this is less appropriate. Impeachment is broad. It's been a little misunderstood. I think high crimes and misdemeanors, it sounds kind of legalistic, but it was not, as I understand it. You may have looked at this much more recently and closely than I have. The original understanding was high crimes just meant crimes in the broad sense against the state. That's what made them
Hmm.
high, as opposed
Yeah.
to pickpocketing or something. And misdemeanors, of course, is even broader. I mean, it's a less important. It's still, in the legal system, misdemeanors are less important than felonies because they're considered, because they're not as severe crimes. And putting that for using that term in a way conveys the kind of all kinds of just actions against the public interest. Now, the founders didn't want it to be used cavalierly. It hasn't been in the U.S. system. Quite the contrary, actually, uh, rarely invoked, and so perfectly appropriate. I mean, this is in fact why that is put in there. And they have quite a long defense in the Federalist Papers of why the House would do the impeaching and the Senate would do the convicting, and 2/3 of the Senate to make it not just an easy thing to do. And so, I think it's absolutely the right thing. And I think we should call for it now, and we should push for it now, and maybe 4 House Republicans will join the Democrats to call for it. There are a whole bunch. There's a crew of these House Republicans who love getting on TV. It seems to me to be somewhat critical of the president, but are very unwilling to pull the trigger on either the War Powers Act or on impeachment or on most other things. I guess Epstein was the one real exception so far, one of 2 or 3 exceptions so far. But of course, this rubber really will hit the road, as you sort of suggested. And don't you think in January, when I do think Democrats will win the House, and I can see that they won't want to begin with it. I mean, they have their own agenda. And they shouldn't. There are ways to do it where it doesn't, of course, take up the entire legislative. Other pieces of legislation can move simultaneously and probably should. But I just think it's irresponsible to say. I mean, it will be unless things radically change. It would be irresponsible not to move with that early in 2027. Don't you think?
No, absolutely. And misdemeanor, I think, actually really illustrates it here because that was not necessarily the petty crime sense of it. It's a more literal sense of like misbehavior.
Yeah.
He's not acting appropriately in public, even if it's not in a sense a legal violation you can point to. And I think all you have to do is put up his Truth Social feed on the projector, and that case kind of makes itself. But yeah, I mean that's the thing is that absolutely when we get there next year, I don't think there's much realistic possibility that they won't impeach him. Like I
Hmm.
don't think they will be able to resist the pressure, the demand, the base. The situation is going to keep getting worse. His approval ratings are just going to continue to tank. I mean, they're already well below generally where they were during the first term. And so, if he's got an approval rating of 30% or something like that, and the outrages just keep continuing, I think that the almost the more interesting question is impeach him for what? Because there's such a
Right.
you could do a whole litany of when I helped with the draft, we had 7 articles in it, and that was like 3 months into when he was back in office. So a lot's happened since then. So I don't know what do you think if you had if you're Jeffrey's getting dragged into this against his will and you got to pick something. And of course, who knows? Some crazy new thing could happen between now and then. But like from what's on the table now, should they throw the kitchen sink at him? Should they try to pick some really specific thing that they can hammer home? What do you think?
Well, I think one thing to say is that this would be 10 months from now, and so obviously things will happen, and so obviously this has to be adjusted to see what the actual truth of the situation is then, and also what has been highlighted in the election campaign. That is, we're all assuming the Democrats will have won the House. I'm kind of assuming that if they go ahead with this, they will have won it in a pretty big victory. So a lot of the impeachment, I think, will be shaped by what did they run on, so to speak. I mean, it'd be a little weird if no Democrat running for the House against Trump ever mentioned issue X, and then suddenly issue X is front and center in impeachment, right? There's a little bit of a kind of just electoral reality that kicks in here. And what is it that people have been voting on? And that way you're not also, running against the will of the voters. You're kind of carrying out what their most recently expressed will. Not that that's everything. There may be issues the voters aren't quite as alert to that are very, very important. And the opposite, voters, there are issues they are alert to, gas prices that he shouldn't be impeached about exactly. So I don't think that should be dispositive, but I think it'll color the way people think about it. I really am not sure. I wasn't sure back in 2019 and 2021 how to frame the impeachment resolutions. And and I'm not sure now. I think this is one reason this should be broadly discussed, and we should talk more about this actually. And like what would different things look like, and what precedents are there for the more general rather than the more particular things. I think people can get a little legalistic in this and talk themselves. We have to have this particular charge and that particular charge, and that was the case with Nixon, which is and with Clinton. Those are the two that everyone remembers, or the most recent ones. And there were particular things that people thought crossed the line and that were therefore listed. I mean, the Nixon one also has broader statements in it about his abuse of power. But I can make the case here that a broad statement of abuses of power, of violations of the rule of law, of the politicization of everything in the executive branch in inappropriate ways, would make more sense with then some subtitles, I suppose, maybe, or supporting evidence than going excessively narrow in it. I mean, I think one thing to think about, I don't quite know what to think about this, is the corruption is so insane and so much of a scale, on such a scale that we've never seen before. That does seem like a classic thing people get impeached for. I mean, just at the
Right.
state level and
Yeah.
judges and so forth.
I
Right?
mean, it's tons of straight up bribery.
Yeah. And so that the bribery for the pardons, but also the incredible corruption of the executive branch, that can't be the whole thing because it just isn't the whole thing. But that certainly, I think, should be part of it. So I guess I don't know. I mean, that was something we should think about. And again, I kind of think that they're not going to think a whole lot about it on the Hill. Maybe a couple of, obviously, some staffers and Senator Sher will be thinking about it, and a couple of people like Jamie Raskin will be. And we can talk to them and are, I'm sure. But it probably is worth doing some thinking on their behalf beforehand of what would be the best way to do it. And I mean, best not just politically, but in a kind of serious constitutional way, really laying out for the history books almost why this exceptional remedy had to be pursued at this time.
And we just ran a piece by Matt Johnson making the case that, even if we don't get to 2/3 in the Senate, it is exactly that point. It is making the statement for history. All this stuff did not pass unremarked and unopposed and just quietly accepted. The corruption is part of it. There's lots of bloody crimes. We talked about the war powers violation, the ICE stuff. I think would probably be in the mix. Yeah. All sorts of things. The boat strikes in the Caribbean. But it matters, that one thing I think of, there was a point, and it's in the show, if you've seen it, Son of the Century, about Mussolini's rise to power. That's really good. But this is a real thing that happened. They show this scene where he shows up in Parliament and challenges them to impeach him. And it was after there'd been a political murder that he was implicated in. This was, he was in office, but it wasn't quite yet a total dictatorship. And he showed up and challenged them to impeach him, and they didn't. And that was kind of the tipping point into when it became an actual kind of fully entrenched authoritarian dictatorship. And that kind of thing matters for history's sake. The impeachment process unlocks tools legally for investigations that the courts have allowed broader scope on than in other cases. But also, there's lots of other things for Congress to do. There's always lots for Congress to do. But realistically, what else are you going to do for these 2 years? That you have Democrats controlling the House. Pretty good chance it's looking like they might even take the Senate and have the majority there. Impeachment is, in a sense, even if you take it as we're not going to get to 67 votes, which I don't think we should completely write off, but if you kind of take that as your working assumption, it's like having hearings on steroids. Right. Like it's a way to make a big public show centered on his wrongdoing and his abuse. And look, we are doing the thing we can do about it. Whereas, what else are you going to do? You can't, overriding a veto is harder than impeachment. You need 2/3 in both houses to override a veto. You'll have some back and forth over funding bills and you probably shut down standoffs and some things, but you're not going to pass big substantive legislation to rein him in as long as he's there, because he's just going to veto it.
And also just the executive is just powerful. I mean, and it's gotten much more powerful than it should have in the last 30, 40 years. And he's expanded its powers hugely and without much opposition. Now, look, Congress needs to rein that back in and oppose and start imposing some checks and guardrails if possible. But he's just having someone that reckless with the power that the American president has, even if it were somewhat more constrained than it is today, God knows, with such a compliant Congress. That's too risky. I mean, I just think that's so I very much agree. You can't assume that all these other guardrails you can dutifully put back up, which you should do, but you can't assume they'll work with this guy in there as president. And in that respect, I think the impeachment is the easiest argument to be actually, the other stuff is policy questions in a way more, right? And so I think it is kind of gets back to earlier conversation, just the craziness and the recklessness is pretty good ground for impeachment. I'll have to look up that Mussolini thing. I wasn't aware of that Mussolini thing. That's interesting. And this a good? I should watch this. Son of the Century.
Son of the Century. It's Italian language, but it's subtitled. It's about.
But I wasn't aware of the parliament that he actually dared the parliament to do it, and I guess that's a very interesting.
Of course, they were all threatened and knew they would have been dragged out and killed. I mean, it wasn't a free vote in that sense by that point, but he did make a show of that was kind of his claim to legitimacy above and beyond, everything else that had happened, is that they refused to impeach him.
And I think, this is a problem that you and I go and talk about executive abuses of power and executive authority. And there is another branch, the Congress, that could stop a lot of this. They could defund things. They could limit things. They could make Trump much more visibly ignore the law instead of ignoring some previous statutes that, he's now redefining or whatever. But Congress is doing nothing to uphold them. So in a way, you could say the courts are doing a little. But it makes it, if Congress doesn't act, it makes it much harder to explain to people that what he's doing really is outrageous. Because hey, if it's so outrageous, there's this other branch that could be stopping a lot of it. Now, right now, it's a Republican Congress. Even that begs the question: well, why are they all such utter party loyalists and Trump loyalists and Trump slaves that they just go along with everything? I mean, the answer, unfortunately, is yes. But I'm just saying it'd be crazy if the Democrats win one or both branches to then let him go on doing this, right? I mean, then you really are just what are you there for?
You can put pressure on the Republican. I mean, they should be denounced for it. I mean, we shouldn't kind of just take it for granted that they'll never do it. I mean, it might be that they'll never do it, but that should be something. They have agency. They are in a position of responsibility too. And, if you're going to go out there and condemn them for enabling all this insanity, you really have to put them on the spot. Like, you can't condemn them for something you're not willing to go advocate and vote for yourself. One thing I've heard a little bit of pushback from folks more on the left, and we kind of touched on this in terms of, you mentioned how it would be Vance who succeeds. And there's people that say, oh, well, Vance is worse. Vance is, he's a deep in the weeds ideologue on all this kind of post-liberal, right-wing, super, nationalist ideology, all these sorts of things he's really into in a way that, is much more, in a sense, he's a lot smarter than Trump. Like, he knows this stuff in a way that Trump only has this inchoate mood ring affiliation with it. But I think that hits at exactly the right point. Like, I would take Vance over Trump, and it's because as much as I disagree with him on pretty much everything, Vance is not day-to-day erratic. He's not chaotic in the way that having Trump's insanity is.
Yeah, look, he's very bad in my opinion, but in a couple of ways. I mean, and this is why it's at the very beginning when Trump was sworn in, I thought, okay, let's see what he does. But it's so obvious that it's both the recklessness and the megalomania too. I mean, Vance might have decided, I don't think he would have, in fact, but to bomb Iran, but he wouldn't have decided in the way Trump did and done it as recklessly, and he wouldn't be. I don't think it's revealing that Vance's guy at the Pentagon is this guy Driscoll, who, again, I'm sure I don't like. I don't know, but I mean, I don't think I would agree with him, and I don't. I think he's probably not a trustworthy character either. But he's not Hegseth, right? The recklessness that Trump encourages in subordinates, and therefore, and in the party and Congress to some degree, and therefore it permeates out to the public, is so dangerous, and dangerous at home with ICE in particular, I'd say, but also but really abroad. And here we are talking about life and death and about nuclear weapons and about war and peace. And so I think there, Vance, again, I just, there's not, it was striking this when Vance was defending Trump, sort of, I guess it was after Trump's genocidal comments, and Vance was abroad, right? I guess he was in Hungary, actually.
He was in
In Hungary,
Hungary.
helping another authoritarian who hopefully is going to lose
Speaking
this
of
Sunday.
wildly improper things to do.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Having said that, if you actually watched Vance defend it, he didn't quite want to go where Trump went, right? He didn't repeat what Trump said about wiping out a civilization. That's effective bargaining technique. He said he defended Trump, but I do think one saw there a little bit of why, one could probably, I'm not sure that the whole system will survive Vance either, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the risks with Trump, the risks because of the megalomania and the craziness are just too great to tolerate.
Yeah. I mean, it's the narcissistic personality disorder. Like Vance would not be having his name chiseled on the Kennedy Center either. And also, I think you're right. I mean, for all his issues, it does seem clear Vance was on the more reluctant side of not wanting to do the Iran war, or at least not do it in the way they went about it and everything. So one thing about this going forward is that I do think there are a lot of Democrats who are going to have to get over that kind of conventional wisdom narrative that, it will backfire, or if it fails, it's not worth doing. Like if he's not convicted, then, it was a waste of time and we look bad and weak. I think a lot of that is overlearning the lesson of Clinton to a degree, because that was an impeachment that did backfire. And we can discuss the merits. I mean, Clinton's behavior certainly didn't age well in retrospect. But that was a case where, it was at the time unpopular, and Republicans had a bit of a backlash over it. But it seems like that's a totally different universe than where we are now. I mean, Trump does not have 60% plus approval ratings in the way Clinton did. And the behavior is, whatever you think of these things, these are not like small charges in the way that was able to be shrugged off as, he was just covering up as an affair, and that's seedy, and he did commit perjury, but like these are core. He's destroying the constitutional system. He is endangering national security and all the rest of it kind of things. Like, it's hard to shrug that off as no big deal. I'm sure there are people who will and do, but like.
No, I very much agree with that, though. And I haven't heard the Clinton thing comparison that much, maybe for that reason. At the end of the day, Clinton, I mean, look, there are things the president could do personally that don't really endanger the system, but that are so reprehensible that he should be impeached. And with Clinton, it wasn't just the sex, as it keeps saying, but it was the lying and the perjury. But whatever, without relitigating that, maybe it was unwise, or maybe it was a closer call. It's nothing like what Trump has done. So with Trump, it is more like the first term Trump situation, but much, much worse. I mean, he was impeached on Ukraine, but the internal guardrails were strong enough that, as you recall, he was stopped from doing what he wanted to do with Ukraine. He had to use, like, Giuliani, who was not part of the government, John Bolton, and people objected, Fiona Hill, Alexander Vindman, all these people we've come to know since. Everyone forgets they were actually in the White House. I mean,
right.
There's no one like that in the White House now. There's no Bolton, there's no Pence, there's no Vindman, there's no Fiona Hill, there's no nothing. And they're all going along, and Trump is much crazier. So the combination is very, very dangerous. And that's, again, where Congress has to step up, because there's nothing, you can't assume Jim Mattis and General Kelly and, as I say, John Bolton and people are going to, and Mark Esper are going to at least slow it down enough that it's not going to be, as risky as Trump would make it on his own. Now it's as risky as Trump wants to be, and Trump wants to be riskier and more unhinged than he was 5-6 years ago. So, no, I totally agree. Substantively, this is that case needs to be made, but I think people are seeing it. I mean, the public is clearly seeing it. That's why his numbers are changing, and people. But it's worth making the case over the next several months too, so the Democrats don't come in and suddenly seem like they're popping a surprise on people. As I say, that doesn't mean that every Democratic candidate has to talk about it so much, but I think those of us who believe this need to make this case pretty robustly over the next 6, 8, 10 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think having it out there in the discussion, in the discourse, and all the rest of it is gonna be part of what moves them, because they are people who operate in their kind of, they have their social media feed like everybody else. They see what people are talking about, and it makes a difference if they say, "Hey, people are talking about this," versus "No, they're not." The other thing that I think it would be probably useful, and I don't run a polling firm, but there have been a few last year. It's been a while. They've been very sporadic, but polling the question of, do you support impeachment? And even early last year, if I recall, it was over 50%. Um, and I think that showing how closely that tracks with disapproval. Now, like when you're talking about kind of on the constitutional merits, it's not the case that Congress should impeach a president anytime he's underwater on his approval ratings. That's where Congress is supposed to be the representative government kind of check on popular passions. But the idea, it does kind of disprove this idea that, oh, there would be some backlash against us. I think being able to show them, hey, no, this is actually what the voters want. And then when they have, I mean, the swings we're seeing in these special elections are just insane. I mean, it's we're talking about 20-point swings in some of these races, and it won't be quite that much in November, but it's going to be a healthy Democratic landslide almost certainly. And midterms are, as we hear constantly, a referendum on the incumbent. And so when the incumbent's party gets not just loses, but kind of dramatically wiped out when they flip the Senate, even though it's a very unfavorable map for them this year. It's a steep climb in terms of which states they have to win and everything. I do think that's going to have momentum to it. And so exactly that, like there needs to be the groundwork laid that this is not something coming out of nowhere come January.
No, I think that's the key. And the key is to lay the substantive groundwork as we've been trying to do in what we've written, because, obviously there were massive landslides in 94 and 2010, and no one then thought the guy should be impeached the next, month, in 95 with Clinton, or 2011 with Obama. They were just policy referenda on healthcare and other issues, a little bit on the personal behavior in some cases of the president. But yeah, so I think it's important. I agree that the election needs to be a big victory, or it's not going to happen. A big Democratic victory, but that's really, how should I say, that's necessary, but not sufficient, and shouldn't be sufficient, really.
Yeah.
And I think we can. The job some of us have on the outside more is making the case for the substantive case for why it's so important that it be done.
And so I guess kind of one question to wrap up here on is, we've talked about all the reasons we should do it anyway, even if they won't convict him. But is there a path, actually, particularly if events take a dramatic turn, or if there's some particular scandal that comes out, or he's a lame duck? Like, because I mean, there was, I forget how many it was, like 7, 10 senators who voted to convict him last time, something like that.
Yeah.
You got to get to in the ballpark of 15 or 20, depending on the election results. But it's actually not that huge a leap from kind of the high watermark of the last impeachment. Is there a conceivable scenario where you flip not just Murkowski, but some of the more kind of center of the caucus Senate Republicans?
Yeah, I think so, and maybe that is. I think it's one of these things. Either the dam will break or it won't. I mean, either it'll be the Democrats plus 1 or 2 or 3 Republicans, probably in the Senate, because the party's gotten so Trumpy, for one thing. Everyone's been elected as Trump loyalists these days, or there'll be a pretty mass defection, in a sense that this can't be tolerated, and so much depends on what happens in the next 6-8 months. And I don't think it's out of the question that people in the administration would even speak up. Cabinet members might resign in protest if Trump's asking them to do illegal things. Generals might resign if he tries to follow through on some of those kinds of threats he made last week with respect to the war in Iran. What if he tries to invade Greenland? I just think there are a lot of things that could make it much more mainstream, and really, and a lot of this that therefore becomes, and how much does the Republican Party liberate itself from its total enslavement to Trump, self-enslavement to Trump, and act as a party that's, as members how much do its leaders act in a different way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think. I mean, it could be a case where it gets to 64. You count individual senators. I kind of think it though. It's either more likely to either be, 53 votes for impeachment. I'm making this all up. How do we know, right? Or 88. You know what I mean? I think they could be just people. We're so used now after 10 years, and we're right to be used to it, and to assume it's the default setting that the party is utterly and totally in Trump's control.
Mm-hmm.
But it's utterly and totally in Trump's control until it isn't. And when it isn't, we don't quite know what that looks like because we haven't gone through this experiment, really. Yeah. And so that's where I do think it could be quite dramatic.
So that was exactly how the Epstein bill went. Once they tipped over having a majority to pass it, it was everybody, let's rush it through unanimously.
Yeah.
And so, that could entirely be it. And I think Greenland is actually a good thing to flag as a possibility because there are still enough Republicans who seem to care about NATO more than maybe some of the
you just can't literally invade a country with which we have zero issues. I mean, it's Iran. We had some there. There's a huge stretch to say that this war didn't have to be authorized, but we had done things. We had been in conflicts with Iran in the past, obviously. In the case of Venezuela, Maduro had been indicted. I mean, there were sort of things that you could tell yourself, not accurately, but enough with Greenland. There's just no cover at all, and I don't think the military would obey that order instantly, or at least large parts of it wouldn't, and some senior officers would resign. So if you get that kind of sense that he's genuinely now being, all the deference is going as it should be going for the normal deference to the president and the commander in chief, that would be a situation where it might really happen. But who knows? We'll know much more as we go forward. But I'm glad you've been emphasizing this. So.
Well, yeah, and the military is another example of when the dam breaks, it goes hard. They won't be refusing orders, but when it happens, it will be a big break. I think so. I don't know. That's a whole other discussion about if and when that will happen. But
right.
I think it is a lot of things where it's that dynamic of it's kind of brittle, and when it goes, it goes. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's good to chat with you as always, and looking forward to seeing all the good stuff at the Bulwark going forward. And we'll, of course, continue to cover all this here at the Unpopulist. So
great. I enjoyed the conversation, and we'll stay in touch, obviously.